and welcome to a special edition of the McLean Chronicles podcast. My name is Ross McLean. This is a special edition. I'm going to replay for you an interview that I did with Richard Syrett. He's a storied talk show host and director here in the city of Toronto, and he runs his own very successful radio show over on Mississauga 960 AM. And we interviewed, he talked to me about, the topic was the trials of Jordan Peterson. You know, the attack right now to silence Jordan Peterson in the courts. And I happily took up the opportunity for this interview because I am a huge Jordan Peterson supporter. But I want to tell you and give you a little bit of background first as to how that came to be for me. Jordan Peterson, when he started out, he's just starting out, he was back in the University of Toronto, getting into the issues with the pronouns, being called out, threatening to be expelled from the university. Then he started getting involved in going up and speaking to our government about censorship laws that they were looking to start to bring in. And he was very boldly speaking about how this is going to be the canary in the coal mine. This is the first to die. It's going to lead to further problems later on with all of the gender pronouns and compelled speech and all the other issues. And sure enough, Jordan Peterson was exactly right. Why was he exactly right? Because he's a man who has studied history. He has studied history extensively, and he's looked at the why of things happen, because of course he's a trained psychologist, and a very good one at that. The man's a master of his trade, and a master at looking and analyzing, breaking details down. I mean, it's gotten to the point now that it's so ridiculous. He was just up for his trial, where the colleges of psychologists decided that he needed media retraining. And they wanted him to learn how to be better on social media. I mean, really? 4.6 million followers on social media, 7 million followers and subscribers on YouTube, over 30 million books sold around the world, and you're going to tell this guy that he doesn't know how to communicate? I think he's one of the greatest communicators we've ever had. But here we go with the censorship, where the courts, this actually went to the courts to have a review of this board that set up this ridiculous ruling that he needs to be retrained. And the judge in this case ruled that, oh no, it's completely all right. And as we discussed in this podcast, I brought it out. The judge who led in writing the ruling on this actually was very much ensconced in the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that he was ruling over with Jordan Peterson. In fact, he worked for the Law Society, and he put all of those work to put those rules into the Law Society's guidelines. And he apparently even wrote an editorial against Jordan Peterson. Yet here he was ruling on him and saying that this was all right to crush his charter rights. Well, I knew Jordan back after his time in the university when he was just being brought out to speak. The group was putting together a free speech seminar, and they were trying to book venues for him to speak with two other prominent speakers. And every place they had booked, the crazy left woke would come around and get the appearance canceled. They would bombard the venue with phone calls, death threats, bomb threats, anything they could do to get them to change. They would get other bookings that were canceled by other groups, and they would just cancel out on Jordan Peterson's free speech seminar and talk that he was going to give. Well, the problem for them came when they went to, they kicked Jordan out of so many spots. The people organizing it finally reached out to one person I knew, a person who actually is a great believer in free speech and who's not a coward. And he said, no one else will take the booking? He says, I'll take it, put it into my auditorium. And that person hired me to come look after security for the event, for doing it. It's where I first got to meet Jordan Peterson and see him. And he's a very dramatic guy when you meet him in person. I mean, he cuts a fine figure when he comes in, and he has a presence. But I was absolutely shocked. The problem I was looking at from a security point of view was looking for woke left people who would try to either, phone in a bomb threat, pull a fire alarm, jump up in the middle of the meeting, throw eggs, all of these sort of things. And of course, we did deal with the weeks leading up to it, bomb threats and all of those sort of things that would come in, and death threats to the event space. But we managed it. We kept on, and we did it. And I was shocked to see, this was sometime in the winter. It was like minus 30 outside, and there was like 3,000 young people lined up outside in the freezing cold for like an hour and a half before we could get them into the building for the venue. And we're bringing all these people in, and I'm looking at them, and I'm profiling them, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, who's going to cause trouble here? And it was such a diverse crowd of young people. And I noticed at one point, this one girl came in, and she looked very, very tomboyish. And she was wearing like overalls and construction boots. And I thought, oh, okay, I got to keep my eye on this one for what this one does. This was my take on her anyways. Well, the event got going. We ran it through, and it no problems. Then it's open mic time. Come up and ask questions, and I'm up guarding near the stage, and who do I see in line but this girl? And I'm thinking, okay, here it comes. I better get ready for her. And she gets up to the mic, and she says, Dr. Peterson, I go to a university, and when I went there for the first year or so, I joined all of the liberal clubs on campus, because I wanted to see what was going on with these liberal clubs and what they were teaching and what the culture is. And then she goes on to say, I realized that all they were teaching was crap and lies, and they were just angry people who didn't do anything. Dr. Peterson, I want to know, how do I start a conservative values club at my university? Well, old Ross was a little bit shocked by that one, saying, boy, Ross, you didn't read this one too right. You didn't read this person right at all. And I looked more and more at the crowd around Dr. Peterson, and he brought in everybody who wanted to get something more out of their lives. I spoke to other kids there, and they came from all over, from British Columbia, from the East Coast, not just the Toronto area. They came from everywhere. They flew in, they came in by train, they rode together in cars. They came from all over because they wanted to hear what this man had to say. It was really quite the start of a phenomena. That was my first experience meeting Jordan Peterson. I just recently did another event that he was speaking at, the security for that, and I have to tell you, Dr. Peterson is just the same backstage as he is on stage. I watched him with people doing the meet and greets where you have to take pictures with everybody and those sort of things. And you won't find a guy that was more human in his connection with everybody who came up and took a picture with him. And they all wanted to talk to him. They all wanted to shake his hand. They all wanted to hug him. They all wanted an autograph. They all wanted their book signs. And Jordan Peterson took time with each one of them. You know, part of my job there was making sure the line got moving a little bit so everybody could get their picture taken, because everybody that went to this VIP event wanted to get their picture taken. And I noticed that what Jordan was doing was the story like I heard about Ronald Reagan before, when he was president of the United States. He'd be in the White House, and they'd bring people into the Oval Office to meet him, just ordinary Americans, and they'd come up, and he'd come out from behind the desk, and he'd reach out, and he'd shake their hand, and he'd say, hello, nice to meet you. And then he'd look at the people, and he realized that many of the people would just freeze looking at him. They couldn't believe that they were in the Oval Office. They couldn't believe that they were meeting the president. They couldn't believe that the president was shaking their hand. And as the story goes, Reagan would never let go of their hand until they snapped out of it a little bit. He wouldn't pull his hand away. He wouldn't break the spell for them. He would stand there as long as it took until they kind of caught on that, oh, okay, now I need to move on. Well, Jordan had that same sort of energy with each person he met. He wasn't rushing people through. He wasn't, spitting nails after the pictures were taken, washing his hand. What do I have to do with all these people? He treated each person like he cared for them, like he was welcoming them into his home or his cottage. It was really something to see. Well, in any event, That's where this man comes from. That's how I know how the man behaves. And I was so glad to give this interview to talk about the trials of Jordan Peterson and how the administrative state is trying to cancel him. So listen into this interview with the great Richard Syrett, and I hope you enjoy this special edition of the McLean Chronicles.
An Ontario court has ruled against psychologist Jordan Peterson, upholding the regulatory body's order that he undergo social media training or risk losing his license to practice. Ross McLean is a crime specialist and host of the McLean Chronicles podcast. Hey, Ross, welcome back.
Hey, good to be with you. Good to also to talk about Jordan Peterson and what he means to this world.
You know, it's interesting to me that he could simply walk away. He hasn't practiced in Ontario since about 2017. He's an author. He's a speaker. He travels the world. He has tremendous influence. He's one of Canada's greatest minds, without question. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need this fight. He could simply walk away, but he's deciding. He's going to spend his money. He's going to have to lawyer up. He's probably going to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court, knowing him. Why do you think he's doing this? Why doesn't he just walk away and tell I call them the Ontario College of Bedwetters, Nail Biters, and Neurotics, to just go pound sand?
Well, I think your description is rather apt with their preferred pronouns for their adjectives, at least our preferred pronouns for them. But look, let me get very serious here for a second. Jordan Peterson is a very serious man who has studied his psychology, obviously. He's also studied the history of fascism and tyranny and carnal man at his worst, what he can do when he's doing the worst. And he has studied these things. And that's why he first came to the fore at the University of Toronto, when he saw, hold on here, you're trying to force language. That's going down a terrible road. He didn't need to pick that fight either. But then he went up to the hearings up in Ottawa, I believe. And he said, no, you can't force this. You're going to do this. You will be putting people in jail. And he decided as a matter of principle, for what his whole life stands for, what his character stands for, is not allowing that sort of thing to happen in this world again. So that's the problem that they're up against. He is a absolute true believer in these principles that he wants to stand behind. And I think he wants to make the point here. And he's not picking this fight. They picked the fight with him. I just want to be clear about that. They're picking the fight with him. And he's going to straighten them out. And he's pretty formidable when you want to argue against him. So I think that's why he's doing it, because that's what his life stands for. That's what he's here for, to help people.
So there were 3 Ontario Divisional Court judges. I only know the name of one of them, Justice Paul Shabazz. And basically, he's in the decision, he says that Peterson cannot have it both ways. He cannot speak as a member of a regulated profession, as a psychologist, without taking responsibility for the risk of harm that flows from him speaking in that trusted capacity. I don't see where the court or the college has established this harm that he supposedly, for taking umbrage with Sports Illustrated's choice of a plus size model, or going against so-called child affirming care, or criticizing our crime minister. Where is the harm? Where is the evidence of harm?
Well, you've nailed on the very, very specific point that a lot of people that I know who work in academia and other places have said as well. It sounds nice because it's I'm going to use this word. You're going to start to hear it a lot out of some of these court decisions. And I believe this was a bad decision. It's reasonable that he should have to be accountable for potential harm that he might cause. It's reasonable. Well, reasonable to who, and who defines the harm? I mean, over in Israel, Netanyahu just went through a huge battle over there Because what the Supreme Court was saying over there was, we can decide if what you did as the leader of the country was reasonable or not. If we don't think it's reasonable, we can overturn you as the leader of the country. So this sneaking in of words like reasonable for doing something and harm of what? Of words, saying things. You know, some of the top psychologists in the world, they use very provocative language when they're dealing with clients in order to bring them to a place where they can get help sometimes. You know, I just finished doing a study on the book Man's Search for Meaning by the survivor of one of the concentration camps. And he, as a practicing psychologist, after he was out, he would have patients sitting in front of him talking about how miserable their life was and how depressed they were and how lousy it was. And he would say to them, why don't you just commit suicide then?
Mm.
And that sounds harsh. But you know what he was looking for? He said, then they would give me their reason for living. I can't, my child. I can't, my family. I can't, my job. I can't, I still have this to do. He would find what their reason for living was. So the fact that someone would use shocking language in order to help shock someone into a fix, that's part of the nature of the game, Richard.
Indeed. Ross McLean, crime specialist, host of the McLean Chronicles podcast. We'll tell you how you can listen. In a moment, we'll come back and discuss the Soviet-era show trial of Jordan Peterson on the other side. Stay with us. The Richard Syrett Show, back with more right here on Saga 960 AM. Welcome to Canada, where if you refuse the jab, you'll be left to die on an organ donor waiting list. And if you have the wrong political views, you'll end up in a Star Chamber trial. That's getting underway today for Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. And then here in Ontario, of course, we have the case of Jordan Peterson, who was ordered by the College of Bedwetters, Nail-Biters, and Neurotics psychologists who get into the profession to figure out why they're so messed up, incidentally. Anyway, they told him that he has to attend a re-education camp. In other words, they're going to teach him how to do social media. Here's one of the greatest social media influencers on the planet. They're going to tell him how he should conduct his social media, even though he hasn't practiced psychology here in Ontario since 2017. And an Ontario court of dunces has agreed with the college. But he's not done fighting. Ross McLean is with us, crime specialist, host of the McLean Chronicles podcast. So here's Justice Paul Shabas again, said the college pursued a reasonable option by ordering the remedial coaching, which both maintained its professional standards while having minimal impact on Peterson's constitutional free speech rights. Minimal impact, they told him, go to re-education camp or you'll lose your license. And even if my understanding is, even if he takes the course, they could still decide he's going to lose his license. How is that maintaining minimal impact on his constitutional free speech rights, Ross?
Well, you know, you talk about this as being a show trial, and it's not far off. One of the problems with the courts today, Richard, and I've been looking at a lot of decisions lately, and I would say for like the last 10 years or so, certainly I've seen a couple of decisions just in the last 6 months where you can absolutely tell the politics of the judge and what they're going to decide based on who appointed them or who they donated money to. Now, this one judge in particular, let's say, is the one that's identified. In 2016, you can look it up, on the Law Society of Ontario, he was the treasurer for the Law Society, and he was one of the ones pushing to bring in diversity, inclusion, and equity into the Law Society so that all the lawyers would have to write rules and principles that says, I will obey the laws of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that was fought for the longest time to try and keep that out. So this judge definitely had a position on it. And I'll come back again to his use of the words reasonable. So this administrative state, these boards, they're just appointed people. They don't have necessarily any legal training at all. They're actually allowed to make decisions that completely violate the law and case law. It can be a totally wrong in-law decision, like I believe this one was, for violating the charter. But the courts, when they review it, can say, oh, but it's reasonable, so we'll let them violate the law. That is not how it's supposed to work. That you end up in the principal's office of the people who don't like you, and they're going to be the ones who decide your fate. And I think it's absolutely terrible the way that our courts have been going. You know, right now we've got, as you said, the Tamara Leach trial on.
Yes.
That courtroom is not being put up on Zoom so that all of Canada can watch it. I mean, only all of Canada was involved in that. Only all of Canada has an interest in that, but it can't be. Someone has to sit and kind of live tweet it. Yet, if this was done during COVID, they would have had to do it on Zoom and put it out so people could see it.
Excellent.
So they clearly, when they do, they do these things sometimes. They want to do them behind closed doors with unnamed people coming out with rulings that go against our God-given rights. Forget the charter rights.
You know, again, this Justice Paul Shabazz commenting on how Peterson's comments, public comments, have the potential to undermine the psychology profession. I would say that Paul Shabazz and his ilk are doing their damn best to undermine all of our confidence in our so-called justice system.
Well, I'm going to agree with you on that. How many people have confidence in their doctors anymore these days? How many people have lost confidence when the doctors tell you have to take this, it's safe and effective, yet you don't know that they're getting paid for it, or they're being told if they don't get you to take it, they'll lose their license. I'm supposed to trust you as a doctor, and we know there's a lot of people who have suffered consequences of that. So we're looking at the courts here. We've got a real problem with our courts. We've got a real problem with them, the way they make decisions and how accountable they are. And what the problem is, Richard, for the average person, when these tribunals go to screw you over, and you know they're screwing you over, you better have $80,000 or $100,000 kicking around to take it to court to get a judicial review to fight it. The penalty is really going to court these days in order to get a case and get yourself heard. They'll penalize you almost worse than the tribunal will. And that's not justice for Canadians. Something needs to change here with this just locking people up, laying charges on them. I mean, we don't even know the specifics of what is it, the Coots for? They've been in jail for how long? With no trial yet? No bail, no nothing. I mean, you can't tell me that that's not undermining our trust in the justice system. It's undermining it, clearly.
It's a travesty and another stain on our already compromised country. Ross, how do we listen to the McLean Chronicles podcast?
Easiest way is to jump on my Twitter. It's at McLean Chronicle, and that's McLean, McLean Chronicle, because I didn't know that I needed one more space for the S for Chronicles, but I got the name anyways for putting it down. But they can find me at McLean Chronicle. There'll be a link to the podcast there on my profile. And I really hope to help educate people so we don't get so swindled by our government and the state so much these days. It's just horrific, some of the things I'm saying. And I'm always glad for your station and your show because you talk about these things in an honest way.
Appreciate your input always, Ross. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap for this special edition of the McLean Chronicles. I'm Ross McLean. Thanks for listening. Please check out my podcast and past episodes. A lot of them are designed to be evergreen. They just don't waste away in the moment. There's something for you in each one of them. Thanks again. This is Ross McLean saying, be safe and stand for something.